My companion rejected me at the altar, but the king kissed me and growled. Now she is mine. Inside, the air was thick with incense and whispers, and the polished marble floors reflected the golden light that streamed through the stained glass windows. Crowds of nobles and citizens had gathered, their eyes fixed on the altar at the far end. It was a day that should have been filled with joy, a celebration of love, honor, and union. Yet, from the moment Lyria stepped into the cathedral, she felt a chill, subtle but unyielding, like a shadow brushing against her heart. She walked slowly, her silk gown rustling with each step, her hands trembling beneath the weight of her embroidered veil. Every eye followed her, every whisper seemed to carry the words of judgment or anticipation, and at the altar, waiting for her, stood Kaelan. Once her companion, her confidant, her chosen partner, he looked every bit the man she thought she knew. His eyes were dark, serious, and for a fleeting moment, Lyria felt the pulse of hope in her chest. But the moment she reached the altar, something in Kaelan's expression shifted. His eyes, once warm and familiar, hardened. The words that followed broke her world in a single, sharp strike. "I cannot," he said, his voice steady, almost cold. The entire cathedral fell silent as though the air itself had frozen. Lyria's breath caught in her throat. "Cannot? What?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, trembling with disbelief. Kaelan's gaze flicked away, toward the grand doors where servants shuffled nervously. "I cannot marry you," gasps erupted through the cathedral. Noblewomen clutched their fans to their mouths and lords exchanged uneasy glances. Some murmured curses under their breath, others looked stunned. The priest paused, unsure of how to proceed, his hands frozen over the holy book. Lyria's knees felt weak, but she forced herself to stand tall, though her heart was shattering into 1,000 pieces. You cannot do this," she said, voice rising. "After all we promised, all we swore, how can you turn your back now?" Kaelan shook his head. I am not the man you think I am. I cannot give you the life you deserve. I cannot." His words faltered, but the finality was clear. Lyria felt a hollow ache in her chest. Her dreams, her hopes, the life she had imagined, all crumbled like brittle leaves in the wind. She looked out at the crowd, faces filled with pity, shock, and curiosity, and she realized with bitter clarity that she had been abandoned in the most public way imaginable. Then a presence shifted behind her. A ripple ran through the cathedral, subtle at first, then undeniable. She felt it like a brush of wind that carries both promise and danger. From the shadows of the grand pillars, a figure emerged, tall, commanding, and impossibly composed. King Darian. He moved with a grace that seemed almost unnatural, each step measured, silent, yet resonant with power. His dark cloak trailed behind him, and the faint shimmer of silver embroidery along its edges caught the sunlight like liquid night. His eyes were sharp, piercing, and yet there was something else in them, a dangerous curiosity, a spark of something that both unnerved and captivated Lyria. He stopped before the altar, where Lyria still trembled. His gaze swept the room, noting the stunned nobles, the fallen pride of her companion, and finally he settled on her. "Step back, child," he said, his voice smooth, yet low and commanding. It was not a threat but an assertion of power that made the air vibrate. Lyria instinctively obeyed, heart racing. Darian's eyes lingered on her, unblinking. Then, unexpectedly, he reached out and took her hand. The touch was light, almost a question, but it carried the weight of authority and unspoken promise. Lyria felt a strange warmth in her fingers, a spark that ran straight to her heart. "Now she is mine," he growled, his voice a mixture of command and possessive longing. The cathedral seemed to hold its breath, the echoes of his words hanging like a shadow over everyone present. Lyria's heart pounded, not from fear alone but from a whirlwind of emotions she could not yet name. Relief, confusion, curiosity, and something deeper, something darker that tugged at her soul. She glanced at Kaelan, who had turned and was hastily retreating toward the cathedral doors. his face pale with shame and fear. The man who had abandoned her was gone, but in his place stood a king whose power was undeniable, whose intent was as fierce as it was mysterious. Before she could respond, Darian moved closer, his hand still holding hers. There was a tension in the air, an electric charge that made the hairs on her arms stand on end. The cathedral, filled with light, now felt like a stage for something far older, far more primal than any human wedding. It was as if the walls themselves had absorbed the power of the king and now pulsed with it, watching, waiting. Who are you to claim me?" Lyria whispered, voice barely audible but firm enough to carry a spark of defiance. "I am the king," Darian said, almost casually, yet every word thrummed with latent power. "And you, Lyria, have entered a world far beyond the lies of men who fear their own hearts." The words sent a shiver down her spine. She did not fully understand him, and yet she felt herself drawn in by his presence, by the intensity of his gaze. For a moment the betrayal by Kaelan faded into a distant ache, replaced by the raw, dangerous allure of this man who seemed to command not just the room, but the very air itself. The crowd murmured, unsure if this was a declaration of protection, a claim, or something darker. Some looked fearful, others awed, but Lyria, standing at the center of this storm, felt only the pull of a new fate, one that promised both peril and possibility. Suddenly, Darian stepped aside and motioned for her to follow. "Come," he said. "There is no time to linger in the ruins of broken promises. You belong elsewhere now." Lyria hesitated. Her world had been shattered mere moments ago, and yet something in her, curiosity, fear, defiance, urged her to move forward. She took a deep breath and allowed the king to lead her from the cathedral, leaving behind the murmurs, the judgment, and the echoes of a life that no longer existed. Outside, the sun burned bright against the horizon, but the world felt changed. The streets were quiet, the air sharp with the scent of stone and distant forests. Darian's horse waited, black as night, its eyes reflecting a strange intelligence. Without a word, he lifted her onto the saddle and then mounted himself. Lyria's stomach clenched at the height, at the speed, and at the fact that she was now riding alongside a man whose reputation both terrified and intrigued her. As they galloped away from the city, the cathedral shrinking behind them, Lyria's mind swirled with questions she could not yet answer. Who was this king? Why had he chosen her? What did he want with her? And perhaps most frightening of all, what was she beginning to feel for him? The journey was silent for a time, the only sounds the wind in her hair and the rhythmic pounding of hooves. Darian did not speak, yet Lyria felt his presence like a shield, a predator, and a guardian all at once. The landscape shifted from stone and civilization to wild forests and shadowed hills, the world becoming wilder, more dangerous, more alive with unseen magic. Finally, as the sun dipped low and the first hints of twilight touched the sky, Darian halted at the edge of a cliff overlooking a valley bathed in silver mist. The sight was breathtaking, almost unreal, and Lyria felt her breath catch. She had left one world of expectations and betrayal behind, only to enter another of mystery, power, and perhaps destiny. "Tomorrow, you will see the truth of this world," Darian said, voice low, almost a growl. "And then, you will understand why you cannot return to the life you once knew." Lyria looked into his eyes, searching for meaning, and found only intensity, an unspoken promise, and something she could not name, a pull toward danger, toward passion, toward a fate she could not yet control. As night fell, the valley below vanished into mist, the stars above shining like frozen fire. Lyria shivered, not from cold, but from the realization that her life had changed forever. She had been abandoned at the altar, humiliated before all, and yet she was not alone, not now. And somewhere deep inside, a spark of fear and longing ignited. The fortress rose from the edge of the misted valley like a dark crown carved from stone and ice. Its towers gleamed in the twilight, sharp and jagged, a structure both magnificent and foreboding. Lyria's heart thudded against her ribs as Darian guided her through the massive iron gates. The scent of cold stone and burning torches greeted her, mingling with something older, something alive, an echo of magic that thrummed in the air. Inside, the hallways stretched longer than the eye could see, walls lined with statues of kings and queens long dead. Their marble eyes seemed to follow her with quiet scrutiny, their frozen expressions both stern and knowing. The corridors were dim, lit only by flickering torches and the soft glow of enchanted crystals embedded in the walls. Lyria walked beside Darian, who moved with the ease of a shadow, his cloak brushing the stone floors in a whisper. "You will live here," Darian said, his voice low, yet carrying the weight of command that brooked no refusal. "But do not mistake safety for freedom. Every corner of this fortress watches, and some walls have ears that do not belong to the living." Lyria's fingers tightened around the folds of her gown. "I am not afraid," she said, though her voice betrayed the tremor of unease. Darian's eyes flickered toward her, sharp, assessing, almost amused. "You will learn fear eventually," he said softly, "but not today. Today you are mine, and I will guard you, whether you wish it or not." He led her to a chamber that overlooked the valley, its windows tall and arched. The room was grand, yet austere, with heavy velvet drapes and a bed draped in deep red. A fireplace roared quietly in the corner, casting dancing shadows on the walls. "This will be your room," he said. "Eat, rest. Tomorrow you begin learning the rules of my world." Lyria nodded, unsure whether to feel grateful or defiant. She sat by the window, watching the fog swirl over the valley below. It was beautiful, terrifying, and strange all at once. She thought of the cathedral, of Kaelan's rejection, and of the king who had claimed her with a single, growled sentence. She did not yet know what to feel, but she sensed that the man beside her, Darian, held power beyond anything she had ever known. The following morning, the fortress awakened with a life of its own. Shadows moved in corners, servants glided silently across stone floors, and the faint hum of unseen magic vibrated through the air. Darian appeared as Lyria descended the grand staircase, his dark cloak swirling behind him, his eyes fixed on her. "Today you will begin your lessons," he said. "Not of swords, not yet. You will learn to see the world as it truly is, to understand power, to recognize danger, and to perceive the truths that most are blind to." Lyria followed him through corridors that twisted like living things. They entered a hall filled with mirrors, each tall and framed with silver runes. Some mirrors reflected more than the present. They showed echoes of the past, faint shadows of moments that had occurred long ago. "Look closely," Darian said. "Not everything is as it seems. There are those who would deceive you, even in places that seem safe. The eyes of the world are never idle." Lyria gazed into one mirror and saw herself, not as she was, but as she had been in the cathedral, trembling and abandoned. Another mirror revealed Kaelan, standing amidst flames that were not there, his face twisted with envy and fear. Lyria shivered, realizing that Darian's lessons were not merely about perception, they were about survival. Over the next days, she began to explore the fortress under Darian's watchful eye. She discovered hidden gardens that glowed with ethereal fireflies, libraries filled with scrolls that whispered in forgotten languages, and halls where the statues of ancestors seemed almost alive. She learned that the king's world was layered with enchantments, some protective, some dangerous, some intended to test those who dared to enter. Darian observed her at every turn, sometimes silently, sometimes with pointed instruction. "You have strength, Lyria," he said one evening as they stood on a balcony overlooking the silvered valley. "You are more capable than you realize, but strength alone will not protect you here. Understanding, intuition, and courage will." Lyria felt a strange warmth at his words, though she did not entirely trust it. She had been abandoned once, humiliated, and thrust into a world ruled by a man whose power seemed absolute. Yet she could not deny that his presence stirred something inside her, a mixture of fear, fascination, and a strange longing. One night, unable to sleep, Lyria wandered into the hidden garden she had discovered earlier. The fireflies glowed softly, illuminating paths that twisted like silver threads among the dark foliage. She traced her fingers along the petals of strange flowers that seemed to hum under her touch, and she felt a power in the air that was at once terrifying and beautiful. Darian appeared silently behind her, his steps so soft that she almost did not hear him. "You should not wander alone," he said, his voice low, almost a growl. "I needed air," she replied, turning to face him. Her heart thumped in her chest, not from fear, but from the nearness of him, from the intensity of his gaze. He stepped closer, and for a moment the world seemed to shrink around them. The garden's glow reflected in his eyes, making them seem like liquid night. "The fortress has many secrets," he said. "Some will protect you, some will try to consume you, and some will test us both." Lyria's chest tightened. "And what about you?" she asked. "Are you to test me too?" Darian's lips curved into the faintest smile, one that did not reach his eyes. "Perhaps. But know this, my tests are never cruel without purpose. You will learn that sometimes fear is the only way to awaken strength you never knew you had." The tension between them was almost unbearable. Lyria could feel the power in him, in the fortress, in the very air around them. She wanted to pull away, to flee, yet a part of her, perhaps the part that had been shattered by betrayal, was drawn to him, to the intensity, the danger, the promise of something she had never known. Days passed, each filled with lessons in perception, patience, and the subtle currents of power that flowed through Darian's realm. Lyria learned to notice the whispers of spirits that guarded the halls, the faint glimmer of enchanted traps, the subtle cues of nobles and servants alike who hid ambitions in their smiles. She also discovered that she could influence small things herself. Objects responded to her touch, plants leaned toward her presence, and the fireflies of the hidden garden seemed to dance more brightly when she walked among them. Darian watched quietly, occasionally offering guidance or correction. "You have potential," he said one evening, as they observed a council meeting from a balcony above. "But potential alone will not save you. You must choose when to act, when to wait, and when to trust. And most importantly, you must learn to trust yourself." Trust was the hardest lesson of all. Lyria had been betrayed once by Kalan, humiliated before the world, and thrust into a realm of shadows and power beyond her comprehension. And yet she found herself slowly, almost unwillingly, beginning to trust Darian. Not entirely, not yet, but in small ways, in the way he protected her, in the way he guided her through danger, and in the rare moments when his guard slipped and she glimpsed the man beneath the crown and the curse. One evening, as a storm raged across the valley below, Lyria found herself in the garden again, the wind whipping her hair around her face. She heard Darian approaching long before she saw him, the soft crunch of boots on gravel. "You are restless," he observed, his voice carrying over the sound of the wind. I think I am afraid," Lyria admitted, her voice small but honest. "Not of this place, not of you, but of what I am becoming here. I do not know if I am strong enough." Darian stepped closer, and for the first time he did not speak in riddles or commands. He simply watched her, the storm reflected in his dark eyes. "Strength is not always measured in power," he said. "Sometimes it is measured in endurance, in courage, in the willingness to face the unknown even when fear claws at your heart." The wind tore at her cloak, and the fireflies swirled like sparks of silver in the dark. Lyria shivered, but not from the cold. The intensity of his gaze, the closeness, the unspoken connection between them made her pulse race. "You are not alone," Darian continued, voice low, almost a growl. "I have chosen you, Lyria. And though I may be cruel, possessive, and feared, you will learn that I guard those I claim fiercely." She wanted to speak, to ask questions, to demand clarity, but the words caught in her throat. The truth was undeniable. She was drawn to him, to his power, to the danger and the promise it carried. And yet, the question of trust lingered, a delicate, dangerous thing that could shatter everything if mishandled. Suddenly, a chill ran down her spine, and she glanced toward the shadows at the edge of the garden. Shapes moved there, fleeting and unnatural. Darian noticed her glance and tensed, his hand brushing hers in a subtle, protective motion. "Not all shadows are what they seem," he said, "but some will test us both. Prepare yourself, Lyria. Darkness will come sooner than you expect." As the storm raged above and the mist swirled in the valley below, Lyria felt the weight of her new life pressing down on her. She had left one world behind, only to enter another, filled with magic, power, and a king whose presence was as intoxicating as it was terrifying. Days in Darian's fortress grew heavier, each filled with lessons, shadows, and the quiet pull of something neither entirely safe nor entirely understood. Lyria had begun to feel the weight of her new world, where every glance, every whisper, and every shadow carried meaning. The castle was alive, not with mere stone or magic alone, but with the unspoken currents of power that flowed through its halls. Here, nothing was simple, and nothing could be trusted entirely. Lyria had learned to navigate corridors where statues seemed to follow her with eyes that flickered faintly in the torchlight. She knew the servants were not just servants, but subtle observers, their faces polite masks hiding minds sharpened by centuries of loyalty and secrets. Even the wind seemed to carry messages, brushing her hair against her face like invisible fingers warning her of danger. Darian's presence hovered constantly, a shadow beside her, a fire beneath her skin. He was a paradox, sometimes merciless, sometimes unexpectedly tender, and always impossibly magnetic. Lyria had learned that anger in his voice could conceal concern, and that calm could hide a storm. She still feared him, yet a part of her, irresistibly, maddeningly, wanted to understand him, to see behind the crown and the curse, to touch the man beneath the king. One morning she awoke to find a message slipped under her door, a scroll sealed with the emblem of Darian's court. The handwriting was elegant, the ink dark, almost black against the parchment. She broke the seal with trembling fingers. "The shadows grow restless. A test approaches. Trust only in what you see and what you know in your heart." Her pulse quickened. She knew instinctively that the message was not merely a warning, but an invitation into something dangerous, something that could not be avoided. Darian appeared beside her as she held the parchment. His expression was unreadable, dark, and intense. "You have received the first test," he said. "It comes sooner than most, but I knew it could not wait. You will face it tonight." Lyria swallowed hard. A test of what? She asked, though the answer did not need to be spoken. She already knew in this fortress tests were never simple. They were trials of mind, body, and spirit. Darian's lips curved faintly, almost imperceptibly. "Of courage," he said. "Of loyalty. Of your willingness to face what you fear the most, and what you desire the most." Night fell quickly, the fortress cloaked in shadows and the howl of wind through the stone towers. Lyria followed Darian to the great hall, where the air seemed to hum with magic. The torches flickered unnaturally, casting long, twisting shadows that seemed almost alive. "You will enter the hall alone," Darian instructed, his voice low, a growl beneath the calm. "Do not rely on me, not yet. You must see clearly with your own eyes, with your own heart." Lyria's hands shook as she stepped forward. The hall was vast, stretching further than the eye could see. Shapes moved in the shadows, fleeting glimpses of forms that vanished before she could identify them. Her heart pounded, but she drew in a steadying breath. Fear had become a companion she could neither welcome nor reject. It was simply part of her now. Then, from the shadows, figures emerged. They were not fully solid, not fully human. Some seemed to shimmer with the faint light of fireflies trapped inside their forms. Others appeared as echoes of people she had known, faces twisted with emotion, anger, envy, grief. "You will face what haunts you," a voice whispered through the hall, ethereal and soft, yet carrying an edge of danger. "Only by confronting it will you survive." Images swirled before her: the cathedral, Kaelan's betrayal, the whispers of nobles, and her own trembling hands at the altar. Lyria forced herself to step forward to confront the illusions. She called out, her voice steady despite the quiver of her heart. "I will not be broken. I will face this." The illusions shifted, morphing into new challenges, shadows that lunged, whispers that tempted, and visions of herself, powerless, alone, or trapped. Lyria's every step was measured, guided by instinct and courage. Her pulse was fierce, her breath sharp, and with each passing moment she felt a growing awareness of her own strength. Hours, or perhaps only minutes passed, and the hall slowly fell silent. The shadows dissolved, leaving Lyria standing, breathless but resolute. She had faced fear, betrayal, and uncertainty. She had survived. When she stepped out into the outer corridor, Darian was waiting. He did not speak at first, only observing her with a gaze that seemed to pierce her very soul. Finally, he spoke, his voice low, almost reverent. "You endured," he said, "and in doing so you began to understand the fortress and perhaps yourself." Lyria felt a strange surge of pride but also exhaustion. She wanted to lean on him to seek comfort, but she hesitated. She had learned caution. Yet Darian stepped closer, placing a hand lightly on her shoulder. The touch was brief, yet it sent a jolt through her, a mixture of warmth and tension that made her heart ache. "The trials will grow harder," he said, "and so will the bond between us. Do not mistake what you feel now for weakness. It is not weakness to recognize desire or fear or longing. It is simply the beginning of understanding yourself and me." Lyria looked at him, searching his face. There was no arrogance, no cruelty here, only a raw, unyielding intensity. She felt herself drawn to it, despite the danger, despite everything she had endured. In the days that followed, Darian began to reveal more of his world. He led her to chambers filled with arcane texts, maps of lands she had never seen, and artifacts that shimmered with magic. He explained the curse that had haunted his family, the reason why his power was both a gift and a burden, and the price he had paid to protect his people. "You see me as strong," he said one evening as they examined a map of the valley below, "but strength alone is never enough. Fear, loss, betrayal, they shape a ruler as much as power does. And now you are part of that world, whether you like it or not." Lyria felt the weight of his words. She was no longer merely a visitor in this dark, magnificent world. She was entwined with the king himself. And with that bond came responsibility, danger, and an intimacy that both terrified and intrigued her. Then came a night unlike any other. The castle trembled as a distant roar echoed through the valley, a force unseen yet undeniable. Shadows gathered unnaturally in the halls, and Lyria sensed the approach of a threat she could neither fully see nor understand. Darian appeared beside her, his eyes sharper than steel, muscles coiled like a predator ready to strike. "They have come," he said, voice low, tense. "Not for me, for you. If they succeed, everything we have fought for will be lost." Lyria's heart leapt into her throat. "Who? Why?" she asked, panic rising, though she tried to steady her voice. Darian's gaze softened for the briefest moment, then hardened. "Enemies who wish to see us fail. You are key to more than my curse. And they know it. We must act, and we must act now." The fortress erupted into controlled chaos. Servants moved swiftly, preparing defenses, corridors filled with whispers and shouts. Lyria found herself in the center of it all, her fear tempered by determination. She would not run, not again. Not when she had already faced betrayal, fear, and shadows beyond imagining. Together, she and Darian navigated the castle, avoiding traps and illusions. At one point, a creature emerged, a form neither fully human nor fully beast, with eyes that glowed like molten silver. Lyria froze, but Darian acted, his movements fluid and precise, striking the creature with strength that seemed impossible. Without thinking, Lyria found herself stepping forward, instinct guiding her, using what she had learned from Darian's lessons. She touched the air, and a wave of energy rippled outward, pushing the creature back. She gasped at the sudden power within her, recognizing a spark of something latent, something connected to the king, to the fortress, and to herself. After the threat had vanished as suddenly as it had appeared, Darian turned to her. His chest heaved, his dark eyes softer now, filled with a mixture of awe and something more, something she could not yet name. You have strength," he said, voice husky. "Stronger than I knew. Stronger than I feared." Lyria swallowed, chest tight. I am not afraid anymore," she whispered, though the truth was complex. Fear remained, but it was tempered by understanding, courage, and a growing bond she could not deny. Darian stepped closer, their hands brushing briefly. The contact was electric, stirring something deep in both of them. "You must remember," he said softly, almost a growl, "this bond, it is not only power but danger and desire and trust. You will be tested again. Soon. And you must be ready." As the castle quieted and the first hints of dawn crept through the high windows, Lyria realized the truth she could no longer ignore. She was irrevocably connected to the king, to the fortress, and to the shadows that lingered in every corner. Her journey had only begun. The storm had begun long before dawn, draping the fortress in sheets of rain that glittered like shards of glass in the torchlight. Thunder shook the battlements, and the valley below was swallowed by silver fog, curling around the cliffs like restless spirits. Lyria stood at the edge of the great balcony, cloak clinging to her, hair wet and wild, and eyes fixed on the darkness that pressed against the walls of the fortress. Beside her, Darian moved silently, a shadow of power and resolve. His cloak flapped in the wind, his expression tense, his jaw set. She felt the electric pull of his presence, the unspoken promise in the way he watched her, protected her, and yet demanded that she trust herself. "They are coming," he said, voice low, almost a growl that carried through the storm. "Tonight you will see why this fortress exists. Tonight the past and the curse collide with the present, and you are at the center of it all." Lyria's heart thudded fiercely. She had faced fear before, had survived shadows, illusions, and attacks, but the weight of what was coming felt different. It was not just threat, it was destiny, raw and unavoidable. "I am ready," she said, her voice steady, though her stomach tightened. She did not fully understand how she could be ready for anything in this world of magic, power, and danger, but she had survived, grown, and learned. She could not turn away now. Darian's eyes softened for a brief moment, a shadow of vulnerability passing over his otherwise unyielding features. "Good," he said. "But remember, this night will test more than courage. It will test trust, loyalty, and heart. Do not fail." The first signs of movement came like whispers across the halls. Shadows flitting where torches did not reach, sounds of metal sliding across stone, and a chill that carried the scent of ancient magic. Lyria followed Darian as he moved through corridors that seemed alive, walls shifting subtly as if responding to the storm outside. They entered the central hall, a vast chamber where the throne once sat empty, carved from black stone and silver filigree. The shadows coalesced here, forming shapes that were neither entirely human nor entirely beast. Their eyes glowed like molten silver, their forms shifting like smoke, testing, taunting, circling. Darian moved to stand in front of her. "Stay close," he said. "These creatures feed on fear. They cannot touch the resolute heart, but they will try to bend it." Lyria nodded, remembering the lessons she had learned. Courage was more than absence of fear. It was standing firm despite it. She drew a deep breath, feeling the magic in the air respond to her presence. Her fingers tingled, the power within her awakening, connected in some way to Darian's own strength. The creatures attacked, swift and silent, and the hall erupted in chaos. Darian moved with predatory grace, striking with power and precision. Lyria followed instinctively, using the lessons he had taught her. Her hands brushed the air and energy flowed outward, pushing back the shadows, turning their aggression aside. Together they formed a formidable force, king and companion, power and courage intertwined. Yet amidst the chaos, a voice echoed, soft, familiar, and venomous. Lyria, she froze, heart lurching. From the shadows emerged a figure she had hoped never to see again, Kaelan. His eyes glinted with ambition and fear, and in his hands he carried a talisman that pulsed with dark magic. "You left me," he hissed, stepping into the light. "You abandoned what was ours, but now I will have what is mine." Darian's hand tightened on hers, his presence a steady force against the tide of fear. "He is nothing," Darian said, voice calm but lethal. "He wields shadows, but he lacks the courage to face the truth. Stand firm, Lyria." The confrontation escalated quickly. Kaelan unleashed spells of darkness that twisted the hall, but Lyria, drawing upon the strength she had discovered, countered with energy that pulsed from her very being. Darian fought with a ferocity born of centuries of power restrained, striking at the shadows while protecting Lyria with unwavering precision. Then came the moment that defined everything. Kaelan, desperate, invoked a spell that threatened not only them but the very heart of the fortress. The walls trembled, the shadows roared, and Lyria felt a pull at her soul, a tug at the very essence of her being. "Now, Lyria," Darian shouted, "use what you have learned. Trust yourself." She did. She reached inward, touching the core of her fear and her courage, the bond that had grown between her and Darian, and the power that had always been part of her. A wave of light erupted from her hands, sweeping through the hall, striking at the talisman, shattering it and dispelling the darkness. Kaelan screamed as the magic turned against him, and in a swirl of smoke and shadow he vanished. The hall fell silent. The storm outside began to calm, the valley bathed in the first hints of dawn. Lyria's chest heaved, exhaustion mingling with exhilaration. She looked at Darian, who stood close, his dark eyes fixed on her with something that made her breath catch, relief, admiration, and something more, something unspoken yet undeniable. "You did it," he said, voice low, almost reverent. "You faced fear, danger, and the shadows, and you prevailed." Lyria shook, not from cold, but from the intensity of the moment. I could not have done it without you," she admitted, her voice soft. "You taught me. You believed in me." Darian stepped closer, the storm of tension between them crackling like lightning. "You believed in yourself," he said. "I only showed you the way." For a long moment they stood together, the weight of the night pressing around them. Then slowly he reached out and their hands intertwined. The touch was gentle, but it carried the promise of something fierce, unyielding, and eternal. "Lyria," he whispered, stepping close, the intensity in his gaze deepening. "This is not the end. The curse is broken, but the trials of the heart, they have only begun. You are bound to me now, not by fear, not by magic, but by something stronger." She felt it too, a bond that went beyond words, beyond fear and danger. Something that had been growing since the cathedral, since the first moment he had claimed her with a growl that had shaken her very soul. And in that quiet dawn, with the storm fading and the fortress calm, Lyria realized she no longer feared the unknown. She was no longer the woman abandoned at the altar, trembling and lost. She was stronger, braver, and bound to a king whose darkness had become a source of light in her life. Together, they walked through the halls, now quiet and empty, the echoes of battle fading. Statues seemed less menacing, shadows less threatening, and the fortress itself seemed to breathe, alive with the harmony of their strength. Darian stopped at the balcony once more, looking over the valley bathed in the soft gold of morning. "This is only the beginning," he said. "The world will still test us, the past will still haunt us, and the future, well, the future is ours to shape." Lyria took a deep breath, feeling the wind in her hair, the warmth of the king's hand holding hers, and the exhilaration of survival and triumph. "Then we shape it together," she said, her voice firm, unyielding, filled with a new courage she had discovered within herself. A moment of silence passed, broken only by the distant call of birds and the whisper of the wind. And for the first time since the cathedral, Lyria felt peace, a dangerous, exhilarating peace, tempered by love, trust, and the knowledge that they were stronger together. Yet, even in this quiet, a flicker of shadow lingered at the edge of the horizon. A figure unseen but watching promised that the trials were not over. But for now, Lyria and Darian shared a bond forged in fire, fear, and desire, unbroken and unyielding.